Welcome to my kitchen, and today we're going to be making baking powder biscuits. And this is something I didn't know if I should actually record or not, because two reasons. Reason number one, no matter how many times I make biscuits, they never taste as good as what my mom made in West Virginia. So, you know, we all have those memories. We know what they used to taste like. I make them. I can't ever live up to what my mom made. So I do my best. And the other thing is, if you ask 10 people how they make their biscuits, you're going to get 10 different recipes. So I'm going to just share the way I make my biscuits most of the time. I do vary the recipe every so often, but this is the way I make them. And what I'd like to do is maybe down in the chat, if you don't mind sharing the way you make your biscuits, I'd love to see the recipes. I love trying new recipes, but just share it ahead of time. This may or may not be the way that you make them, so just giving you that heads up. So the first thing you want to do is measure out 2 cups of all-purpose flour. Now what you want to do when you do this, you don't want to just scoop it out. What I do is use a spoon. The reason being, if you just scoop it out, a lot of times it'll compact it. And a lot of people who have dry biscuits, that's kind of the reason why, is because what they do is they just scoop it instead of spooning. So I always spoon mine in first and just kind of overfill it, and then just kind of just scrape it off. You don't have to be perfect, but you just want to put 2 cups in. And then just scrape off the top. So again, nothing's perfect in biscuit making. So you put your 2 cups in, and the next thing you want to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So just measure that out real quick. You want to put a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda in. And then you want to put about I say a tablespoon of salt. Now, I use salted butter this time, and I usually use unsalted butter, so I'm not going to put as much salt in because of the salted butter I'm going to be using. So I'm going to put about half a teaspoon in. But if you use unsalted butter, then I'd put about a full teaspoon in. I'm just going to put a little less in just because I'm using salted butter. So once that's completed, you just want to whisk it all together and just kind of mix it together. Just make sure everything is nicely combined. Now this is one thing I do different than I think a lot of people, but next thing is you're going to add your fat, and you can use lard, you can use shortening, you can use butter. I like to use butter. I think the butter has a better taste to it, and I have to say I like them being a real buttery flavor. So if you're not real big on having a real buttery flavor to your biscuits, you may want to cut back, but I put a full stick in when I do it. And the way I do it, I actually take a stick of butter, I'll cut it into thirds like I did here, and I stick it in the freezer for a while, and you'll see why. What I do, I use a rotary grater to put my butter in. So all I do is I'll just take one of my pieces of butter, put it in this rotary grater, which is actually made for cheese. And I've found this works really well because it kind of just grinds it up. Every so often you got to tap it out. But this is a really easy way to cut in your butter. And these rotary graters, they're cheap. I mean, they're not that expensive, so I found it's worth it. So I used to use other methods to get it in, but I find these rotary graters, you can get them really not very expensive. I mean, you go to Olive Garden, if you go to Olive Garden, you see everybody has one of these, but probably never thought about using one for biscuits. But I tell you what, it works good for me. So I got the last piece of butter I'll put in. Just tap it out there a little bit so it doesn't all stick together. And that's about it. So I'm going to get a fork here. If you have a pastry cutter, you can use that too, but I'm just going to use a fork kind of to cut it in. But because you use that rotary cutter on your butter, it makes it really, really easy just to kind of combine it around. Doesn't take any time at all. So once you got your dry ingredients and your butter mixed up, and you can see it starts getting a little crumbly as the butter starts mixing in with your dry ingredients. The next step you want to do is you want to add your buttermilk. Now, two options here. You can either use buttermilk, which is what I like to use. You can also just use regular milk. But I like buttermilk. I just think it adds a little bit to the flavor. And the way I do it is after my dry ingredients and the butter are mixed together, I'm just going to make a little hole in the middle. And that's where I'm going to pour in my buttermilk. Now, I usually put in about 3/4 of a cup. It kind of varies. Like I said, you can use milk or buttermilk. I kind of like the flavor of buttermilk in my biscuits. If you don't have buttermilk, you can get away with using milk. And I say 3/4. A lot of times I'll just put in a little bit over that. So I made a little well in the middle. All I'm going to do is just pour that buttermilk in that well. And one of the keys for buttermilk biscuits, or this is what these are now, the baking powder biscuits with buttermilk, is you don't want to overmix it. So what I do is I just start gently bringing in the dry ingredients from the side into the middle where the buttermilk is. And you'll see it soaks it up pretty quick. But you definitely don't want to overdo it. So it'll get crumbly when you do this as the buttermilk goes in with the butter and everything else. But I don't know if you can kind of see. That's pretty much what I usually end up with. You can see it's still really powdery, but you can see the butter's mixed in, buttermilk started mixing in. So now what we're going to do, we're going to dump it on the surface here, and we're going to go ahead and start kneading it. So I normally just use my countertop, and what I'll do is I'll just sprinkle a little flour on there. I just got recently one of these. I kind of like it. It kind of does the same thing without making a mess, but I'll just sprinkle some on there. I actually put more than what I needed just to show you how that works. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to dump this down, and you'll see how crumbly this is as I dump it in, but that's fine. And then what I'm going to do, I want to work it together, but I want to do it in such a way that I'm not actually going to overwork it. Because the more you work it, the rougher it gets. Or the more you work it, the tougher it gets. So I'm just going to kind of bring it together first. And the whole purpose here is just to kind of make a square. And what I like to do, I actually cut it in half. And even though you can see it's still really powdery here, I'm going to bring that half on top. And then I'm going to push it together again. But you'll find it's kind of a secret, and it's probably why my mom's biscuits always taste better than mine. I don't remember a lot of it because I was so little when she made them. But I remember how they tasted, remember how they smelled. But she was able to do this in a way that I've never been able to do it. So I kind of squish it out here and just put a little bit more, just a little more flour on top. I'll cut it in half, and what I do is I try to just bring it on top. And again, I'll just push it out. And I'll cut it again, and I'll just put that on top. Now you see how it's starting to stick together a little bit better each time I do that. So it's kind of a trick of the trade, probably a trick that I haven't learned yet as much as my family had when I was growing up. But you want to almost have a balance there. You don't want to overwork it, but at the same time, you want to make sure that it comes together well. So let's see, I'll do it maybe one more time, see how that works. Yeah, that worked real well that time. You can see how it's really starting to come together. And again, I'm just going to squish it out. I don't use a roller. A little bit more flour in my hands. I don't use, like I said, I don't use a roller, I just use my hands. So, and I usually make it about half an inch. You can go half an inch, 3/4 inch, depending on what you're doing here. But you can kind of see what I ended up with here. So like I said, I didn't overwork it. I tried not to overwork it, but that should work pretty well, I think. Now, one of the keys, I think, to this, a lot of people at this point, what they're going to do is they're just going to use a cup to make the biscuits. And it's really worth investing in a biscuit cutter. The reason being, a biscuit cutter does what it's called, it cuts it. And what I found is when you use a cup, because of how thick it is, it actually just squishes it. So what I do, I'll just dip my biscuit cutter in there, and you can get different sizes, but I'll just go ahead and I'm just going to start cutting them out. And let's see here, I think I'll form that. And then again, what you want to do is just bring the rest of it back together. You don't want to overwork it, because again, the more you work it, the worse the biscuits get. So let me just bring that into a little baby rectangle. We'll get maybe a couple more out of this. And then you always get that one orphan at the end that's either too big or too small to make a full one. So that's the one that I always end up eating first, because it's going to look a little different than the rest. So let me wash my hands real quick, because I'm going to show you the next step. So I always make my biscuits in cast iron. So I'm just going to get my cast iron down. I'm not sure if this is 8 or 9 inch. This is what I'm going to use, and what I do, I always put a little bit of butter in here beforehand. And again, if you're using something else, you may use something else. I don't know, I like to taste the butter on my biscuits. I just think it has a little bit better taste than lard. Or, I mean, again, you can use oils or something like that. I just, you know, for me, I've used lard, I've used butter, and I just prefer butter. So once you get that coated, what you're going to do is you start laying your biscuits in there. Now, one of the things you want to do when you lay them in there is you want them touching the side, and you want them touching each other. The reason being is when they start to go up, if they're touching each other, they're going to go up instead of out, and kind of helps them climb somehow. Not sure exactly why it does that, but I just found that when you do it that way, they'll climb. And then the ugly boy, I'm going to put him in the middle. So you can kind of see what it looks like. That's what it ends up being. And I don't know if this is an 8 or 9 inch, but that pretty much works out normally. Sometimes there's a little space left over. Sometimes I have to squish them in a little bit more, but that's what you got. So I've heated the oven to 425. I'm going to go ahead and put these in the oven, and we'll check them about 10, 13 minutes or so. Just keep an eye on them. One thing with biscuits, you don't want to overcook them, because that's how it really dries them out. So let's put them on in, put them in the middle, 425. We'll see what we get. So it's been about 15 minutes. I checked and they look like they're ready. So let's bring them on over. Now I don't know if you can get a good look at them here. They look pretty good. They rise. They're not my best batch ever, but they look pretty good. Let me see if I can pull one out here. Oh yeah, he's falling apart before I even bring him out. You should let him cool off a little bit, but let me put him on there and you can see how flaky that is. I mean, it just pulls apart and you can see the steam. That's a good biscuit. And I'm tempted of eating these, but I gotta tell you, the reason I made this batch is tomorrow, if they get stale enough, I'm going to be making biscuit pudding. And that's one of my favorites. Back in the old days, you always called it bread pudding, or a lot of people call it bread pudding or pudding. But back in the old days in the hills, you used biscuits. You made biscuit pudding. And so that's what I actually made these for. I'm going to let them sit for a day or two, get stale, and then I'm going to show you my recipe for bread pudding. So I hope you enjoyed this video, how I make my biscuits. And again, I'll tell you 100 times, my biscuits never compare to the way my mom made them in West Virginia. But you know, maybe when I get to what her age was back then, I'm getting close to it. I'll be able to make them the way she did. But mine don't ever taste as good as hers. But, and again, everybody out there's got different recipes. This is the way I make them. Most of the time, I do change it around. But go ahead and in the chat, put down how you make your biscuits. Let me know the process, what you did differently. And I'd love to see those recipes because I love trying new recipes all the time. This is how I made them. I made these because today, not today, but tomorrow or the day after, I'm going to be using these to make bread or biscuit pudding. So look forward to seeing that video. Hope you like it. Hope it turns out good. Thanks again for watching, and look forward to hearing from me in the chat if you have different recipes out there. If you like this video, please go ahead and like it. If you want to see more like this, please subscribe to the channel, and I can't wait to see you next time. Like I said, hopefully tomorrow or the day after, depending on when these are ready, we're going to be making some bread biscuit pudding. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon. Bye.